my starting point really for this is to acknowledge what's gone on in the past. And I think that kind of speaks to what you were just saying about renewal and the idea of change coming in cycles. If we look right back to the root of what we consider to be story, we have one of the great mysteries of our past, which is how and when did the evolution of complex language come about? The means by which we conveyed culture and meaning and what we think of as story for a huge amount of time, potentially since before the time when we were Homo sapiens. We may have been telling stories for over 500,000 years. We don't know. But we've got some idea. We know that in the record of what's been discovered, the archaeological record, there are fires that start to appear in around about 400,000 years ago, much more frequently, and there seems to be some cultural significance to those fires. So maybe it's just we're cooking food. Maybe it's that we're gathering around these fires. If we're gathering around these fires, how is that developing the way we communicate? Is that the beginning of the story? Is that where the story comes from? 400 millennia ago, are we sat around, for the first time, recounting our experiences to each other, recounting the little bits of what become more advanced cultures. I like the idea of that 400 millennia of development of story. And here we are passing stories around in our hands in multiple different ways every minute of every day. That to me feels like an incredible thing. So we've been weaving stories for a really long time. Visual storytelling probably came about another 330 odd millennia later. We'd seen no evidence of cave paintings or any of that kind of thing until not much more than about 60,000 years ago. So we're getting quite up to date now. About 99% of storytelling that has ever occurred, we can pretty much say is spoken language storytelling. And I've always felt really deeply that the spoken word hits the mark in a way that many other ways of conveying story don't. I don't know whether you guys are Audible listeners or podcast listeners, but I digest most of my stories that way. And it feels right somehow, in a way that I can't explain. Maybe 400 millennia of time gets to the heart of that. Let's move a bit closer to now, from 60,000 years to about 20 years ago, using the incredibly reliable mechanism of Google. I determined that a man named Danny J. Gregoire was the first person on the 16th of September 2004 to use the word podcast. And so 19 years. A podcast has existed for 19 years. Just think of all of the different kinds of mechanisms for storytelling that have come about in the last the last year, the last 2 years, the last 5 years, let alone the last 19 years. And I think in this pattern of evolution of storytelling, we see the pattern in the evolution of so much of what we think about how our society functions today, the evolution of technology, the evolution of our mechanisms for making a mess of the world. These things speed up. These things are in effect exponential in the way that they move forward in time. And that's an amazing thing. So podcasts. I love a podcast. I listened to a podcast called Crowd Science. There was an episode of it in about 2020 called Were My Atoms Once Your Atoms? And in this podcast, I I found it just absolutely blew my mind, and many of you may know this, but the idea was that within each of our bodies, there are 1 billion atoms that effectively belonged to other human beings at some point in the past. No way of knowing whose, but there are 109 billion people that have lived and died on this planet, and 1 billion of them, 1/100th of the people that have ever been alive, are represented in atoms in your body. So in the room that we're in right now, where I can't see exactly how many people there are, but we represent a large percentage of the people who have ever lived on the planet in terms of some atom somewhere amongst one of each of us. And that to me is an incredibly connecting thing, because it takes us beyond the idea of ancestry and beyond the idea of DNA as a connecting factor to other humans, and to the point where we can see that we're connected much more intimately with many, many, many more people. And beyond that, not just with many more people, but with all of those storytellers from 400 millennia who are in us, with the animals and the plants. And we all know, I don't want to go too Brian Cox on you, but we all know, we're made of stardust. We all know that stuff. And I find that profound and interesting. And before I go on to how that has anything to do with the topic, I wanted to share a poem with you from my book. This is called Atoms. Each of us wakes in the morning, wakes up in a body alone, a flicker of consciousness burning, encased in our flesh and our bones, each one a collection of organs, in turn a collection of cells, each built from 1 billion atoms with 1 billion stories to tell. Some from the stars up above us, some built of sand and of stone. Inside every one of our bodies, 1 million dinosaurs roam. We're each made of Julius Caesar. We're each made of Emperor Qin, a little of William Shakespeare, a little of Anne Boleyn. And 10 million years in the future, each atom will surely still be the tiniest part of the body that long ago used to be me. New life will evolve from our ashes, composed of the memories lost, some made out of Britney Spears, and some made out of David Frost, some made out of Marcus Rashford, and some out of Meghan Markle. And then your time will come again, another chance to sparkle, as the atoms that were you are now in everything alive. You are everywhere at once. Every piece of you survives, not alone within your body, but out in the world and free. There is no way of knowing all the wonders that you'll be, future worlds that you'll discover out of time and out of mind. Freed of consciousness and body, heaven knows what you will find. When you fly beyond the mountains, beyond touch and taste and sight, you will transcend this mortal life before you say goodnight. That's a poem. So I won't do that too many times. Depends how you feel about poetry, but I'll read another one in a little while. So we're all made of the same stuff. We're all made of, I could look at any one of you and say, well, Jenny, you're made of the same stuff as Emmeline Pankhurst, and Roy, you're made of the same stuff as Mahatma Gandhi. It's quite extraordinary that can actually be interpreted as a literal statement. And to me, that sense of connection through the past into the future, between us all, that interconnecting web of what we are, is incredibly fundamental to the stories that we tell now in this time, where so much is breaking down and where there is this polycrisis and this shared challenge. I think that there is a great relevance. Every ancient civilization has told stories and have told marketing stories. There's people have discovered Egyptian papyrus posters, and and ancient Chinese advertising jingles and all kinds of ways in which marketing messages have been there for thousands of years. So they're part of our history of stories. Stories to sell, stories to define our identity, to make sense of our cultural expectations, to learn skills, but most importantly, stories are things that touch our hearts, and they influence our desires and our dreams, and they influence our anxieties and our nightmares. And sometimes where marketing connects with storytelling, we can leverage in to those dreams and those nightmares and towards futures that are either utopian or they're dystopian, futures that we can be really, really excited about, but that are false. So a utopian future which is entirely stable and all the problems have been solved, or dystopian futures where it's all gone to hell. It's easy to terrify people into buying things, and it's relatively easy to give people dreams to aspire to that are false dreams. And the idea of what I've come across, this idea of Thrutopia, which is very much not my idea, but it's an idea that I am very fond of, is that there are the two futures that our imagination wants to take us towards, this future of dreams and this future of nightmares. And then there's a third future. And that future is not to do with a future that happens to us. It's to do with the future that happens through us, through our actions, through our decisions of how we turn up in the moment. And that connects very much back to, I remember the MarketingKind session with John Alexander speaking about citizens and how to show up as a citizen in our communities. And Thrutopia is on similar ground. How do we show up now to act into the future? What does that look like? Rather than how do we try and achieve an endpoint? There is no endpoint. The future is not an endpoint. We're just on a journey, and that journey is Thrutopian. That's the feeling around what Thrutopia is, and it came to me via an author, a best-selling author called Manda Scott, who you may have come across. She's written a series of novels called the Boudica Dreaming series, and some other novels as well. And she presents an excellent podcast called Accidental Gods. And I'm not just saying it's excellent because I've been on it. It is very good. She talks to some incredible people. But Manda came across that idea through Rupert Read. And Rupert Read, if you don't know of Rupert, he's been a spokesperson for and political strategist for Extinction Rebellion, spokesperson and national parliamentary candidate, European parliamentary candidate, councillor for the Green Party. He also formerly chaired the ecological think tank Greenhouse, and he now co-leads the Climate Majority Project. So he's been thinking about the future, thinking about the narratives that go towards that future for a lot longer than I have. In fact, it's 6 years ago now, 2017, when Rupert wrote an article for Huffington Post entitled "Thrutopia: Why Neither Dystopias Nor Utopias Are Enough to Get Us Through the Climate Crisis, and How a Thrutopia Could Be." It's a long title, but it's a really great article. I can share the link. I would do that in the chat if my mental capacity allowed me to do two things at once. But I may do it in a little while when we start having a discussion. But it's a great article to read, and it really leans into this idea that you have an imagined future that happens to you, and you have a potential real future that happens through us all. And that, I think, is a lovely idea. To quote the article, Rupert says, Thrutopia, by contrast to utopia and dystopia, through beginning with the idea of us getting through crisis, actually emphasizes paying attention to the present indefinitely or even infinitely into the future. it doesn't let us defer our dreams to somewhere else, a utopia. And I like that idea of not deferring our dreams or holding off on our nightmares, but acting into the future. So Thrutopia suggests this kind of tantalizing idea, tantalizing to me anyway, that if we're aligned, if everyone in this room is aligned in our thinking in any particular moment on change, then we can actually change right now to make something happen. And if everyone within our community were aligned in their thinking on a particular change in the community, then we could just do that. We could just make that change happen. And there's something really exciting about the idea that actually change is more about the alignment of our Thrutopian vision than it is about some grand plan of what the future has to be. And I've tried to capture the idea of that in another poem, which is called "The Future Is Already Here." And I shall read it to you now. Hang on, I can find it. The future you seek is already here. It's locked to the beat of your heart. When the world that we weave is unwoven, every thread that is left plays its part in weaving a new web of meaning, in planting the seeds of belief, a vision that follows the dreaming, the root and the branch and the leaf. All patterns are interconnected, each fractal a sum of the whole. Our world in its chaos and glory, a body at one with its soul. Its true source of power is compassion, the calling so gentle and clear, a whisper of wisdom and wonder for the future that's already here. That's another poem. It's amazing so I did my book launch last night and read a bunch of poems to a bunch of people. And if there's one thing that points out the difference between being in a room with a bunch of people and being on a Zoom call, it's reading out a poem to them, because you can feel a reaction in the room. But when you're on a Zoom call, you're just reading a poem out to a screen, and it's weird. So bless you all for letting me do that. Now, that whole thing, the future is already here, Thrutopia, I've been trying to attach the idea of Thrutopia to marketing. That's where I am. I wrote an article a little while back on LinkedIn about Thrutopia and marketing, which leans on a bit of a framework for what Thrutopian storytelling is, that was put together by Amanda Scott, who I mentioned earlier on. And that article's there, but really that for me is the question that starts a discussion is, what might Thrutopian marketing look like? How do we take the idea of Thrutopia, the idea of the future that happens through us, and apply some principles maybe to the way that we make decisions around marketing? That was where my mind had gone.